Spectrum.
Alert!
Spectrum.
Alert, class! Do you believe in a flying spaghetti monster too, Bubblehead?
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Spectrum podcast. Today we're joined by myself, Darren.
Me, Russian.
Me, Rohan.
Me, Addy.
I'm Mustafa.
Ms Macgregor.
I'm Ali as well.
And today, of course, we're so graciously joined here today with Ms Macgregor. She is the head of history and politics at our school. And today we just wanted to do a bit of discussion. So, Ms Macgregor, we want to see where you stand on the spectrum. Cats or dogs?
Well, as you know, I do like a good cat. I now have 3 of them.
Oh.
But I also love dogs. I would have a dog tomorrow if the headmaster would let me bring it into school.
You bring your cats into school?
No, but I can't leave a dog for
Oh.
more than a few hours. So if I'm going to continue to work at school, I would need an allowance to be made for me to be able to bring a dog into school. Would anyone notice in my office?
No, it's so...
Oh, I'm pretty sure you're right up there.
I don't even know where you're.
But do you think you
I
could?
know, exactly.
Do you think you could own both dogs and cats?
Ooh, one of my cats is a bit like a dog, so I'd accept that.
A lot of people do that though.
Yeah.
You have quite interesting names for your cats.
I do. Well, everyone's favourite name is obviously King Henry V, who is
classic.
named after obviously a classic king. He is a bit of a bruiser in the neighbourhood. He has a reputation as a bit of an Aspo cat. One of my neighbours put on the local Facebook group that there was a black cat with a red collar who kept coming into her house and beating up her cat. I was too ashamed to say that it was my cat. I like to think my cat is probably French, because obviously Balabagincourt, Henry V, very famously beat the French. But yeah, he does have a bit of a reputation. I also have Herbert, my 3-legged cat, who would be very mighty if he had another leg. And I now have a giant white furry one called Buddy, who lacks a good name. I know, but he came with that name, so we've got to accept it. Yeah.
I'm more of a dog person myself.
Big fan of cats.
Ali's got a cat.
Ali's got a
Ali's cat.
I've got a cat.
Didn't you have turtles, Ali?
I did.
What happened to your turtles?
Okay, so here's a story. My sister wanted turtles. It was like a really big thing in our family that she really wanted it for like 2 years. So then my mum was like, okay, we're gonna get them. Then we got 2 turtles. I don't even know the names of them. I'm in my room. I'm not really socializing with them.
Oh my gosh.
And then
the others.
for about a week, or maybe a week and a bit, we have the turtles. And then I come downstairs and I notice something's different. I notice that there aren't any turtles present anymore. And there's just a tank. And I'm wondering...
Were they floating on the top?
No, they weren't floating on the top. Like, thankfully they weren't. But I was looking and I was like... I was putting two and two together and realising that they aren't here anymore. And I asked my sister, where have they gone? She says, we have to give them back. And I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking something's bad happened, okay? A short story, my sister couldn't handle the responsibility, okay? I think she fed them once in like the whole week. And my mum was thinking she's feeding them every day, or at least she's putting the feeder up. No, she just completely forgot about it. And then when my mum found out, she was like, no. She's like, I'm pulling out, okay? Nothing is happening here, and then we need to give them back. So yeah, that was the short story.
How long do you have them for?
A week and a half.
It's sort of neglect, isn't it?
Yeah, that is.
My sister's 13 now.
Oh, okay.
So,
I thought it was like uni student. I was going to say.
No.
Well, today we are recording on the 24th of February, I believe. And of course, this morning we all awoke to the news of Russia invading Ukraine. So who wants to
We
start?
first covered the topic of Ukraine before we broke up for the Christmas holidays.
First episode.
Yeah, late December. And I believe there was tension between Russia and the NATO countries because Ukraine had proposed to joining NATO. And it's kind of, I'm struggling to remember what we were saying, but I do remember there being a general consensus that we would never reach the stage of war regarding
Yeah, we did say this
regarding this topic.
Yeah, we said this on a previous episode. We said that we don't think there will ever be a genuine land hot war in our lifetimes at the very least, but any time in the future. So who here actually thought back in December or when the news came out at first that it was going to escalate this much?
I did.
Really?
Yeah, I think you can see all the signs of it from quite a long time ago. Russia's always been a country which likes to dominate the region in Eastern Europe. And I think Putin, getting to where he is in a time of his life, he's ageing a bit. It's getting to the point where he is having one sort of maybe last hurrah, is what I'm going with. But I think he might continue. I think NATO is a real tipping point. I mean, what does it mean to join NATO? If Ukraine were to join NATO, what does that mean?
But it's technically an anti-Soviet organisation.
Yeah, that you have
Originally.
American guns like on the front door.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's going to mean that if one country who's part of NATO gets invaded, what do all the others have to do?
They have to
Support
back that
countries.
country.
Yeah, they have to support them. So it would be Ukraine would be. It would lead to potentially a much bigger war if they did join NATO. I mean, don't you remember France in the 1970s during the Cold War left NATO because they didn't want to be dragged into a nuclear war? And I think you can see the same thing here. So I think you could see the signs.
Do you think it would make Russia more cautious though if Ukraine were to join NATO? Or if they joined NATO back in December, do you think this would have stopped the invasion?
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, I don't think. How much do you think the NATO countries want the Ukraine to join? Certainly not now.
Yeah.
No one really wants war, it seems, apart from Putin.
Could you ever envision nuclear war or even a hot war happening?
I mean, I can envision what we've got at the moment, a limited war. They're using everything but nuclear weapons.
Yeah,
Do they still believe in mutually assured destruction?
100%.
Yeah.
Surely.
From what
Yeah.
Putin said this morning.
I don't think
Yeah.
so.
That statement.
Nobody's going to be willing to be the first one to send out a nuclear weapon or like deploy
But
one.
first strike is still a legitimate theory. I don't know. I mean, think if Putin is prepared to invade a country, what is the purpose in invading a country? You might as well say if he's prepared to do that, he'd be prepared to drop a nuclear bomb somewhere.
Well, that's
No,
good. I think
I-
doesn't he already think that Ukraine is a part
His,
of Russia?
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, but he
it's
said they
kind
have no history of sovereignty, which they do, and they always have done. Other countries, like Poland, for example, were part of the Russian Empire. If I was in Poland right now, I would be rather worried. And they obviously are part of NATO,
Isn't Poland like?
right next to Ukraine.
Yeah.
They share a massive land border with Ukraine.
I think NATO's or some kind of soldiers are already there waiting on that.
They're on the Belarus border.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Next
they're
I
really-
would be worried about that. I mean, Poland is always known as the corridor to Russia. You know, they came through, the Germans came through in World War One and World War Two. You know, if I was a doom mongerer, I would say that's where I would look next, and I'd also look to China next. In terms of China invading other countries like Taiwan, going down Tibet way, I think this could be the beginning of quite a lot more. This isn't the end of it, this is the beginning of something.
At what point do you think NATO or any other organisation will have to intervene? Military? Like with their military?
I think they'll go really strict on financial, but I think the legalities of financial sanctions are really difficult. I mean, if you were to say anyone who's a Russian citizen in the UK, we're going to take all your money or freeze your assets, legally, that's really difficult to actually do. But I think the only way you're going to get Putin to listen isn't by military, because he loves it. That would give him total propaganda to get all of Russia to be like, look, we're under attack. If you do it where you get all the people who are kind of around Putin, all the Russian oligarchs, where the money is, and really sanction them and make them unhappy, it's probably going to be better. Does he care what the Russian people think? I
Well,
think that's to stop him.
I think already people like really high up in the Russian government have already been like to an extent they've been sanctioned,
Yeah,
and also some large
Banks.
companies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Russian banks.
pretty small though.
5 Russian banks were sanctioned by the UK, and then quite a few by America.
Instead
That's not
of
new though. The Americans have sanctioned a number of Russian citizens for years over being corrupt. How much sort of Russian money is in London, for example? And how much money does Britain make from that Russian money? How many jobs, how many livelihoods are dependent upon that money?
I mean, we've seen like the global impact of this whole invasion because the stock market this morning I think is in turmoil, to be honest.
Yeah, it was
Like,
a third of what it was a week ago.
and then Russia withdrew their Bitcoin, which is about 3.6 billion or something crazy like that.
Shouldn't have held that.
Should have sold
Diamond
straight
hands,
away.
diamond hands.
But instead of kind of the West deploying hard military power, another thing I read was maybe instead a cyber war attack.
That's what I thought.
And I feel like that could have just as big as an effect, except obviously it wouldn't
I
lead
think
to
it would be
people's
worse.
deaths.
But yeah, don't you think that if the UK was or the US or the UK were to implement cyber warfare, Russia would just retaliate?
Yeah, 100%.
Because there's nothing we could do to stop them from retaliating. Because now, if you wanted a cyber war, you could do it from any country, anywhere in the world, to anywhere in the world.
Yeah, but that is a much better alternative to people like launching bombs. And
But then
detonating
infrastructure would
vehicles.
just stop like completely.
Yeah, I know, but surely you'd much rather that than anyone to
I
die.
think the consequence will ultimately be the same. I think.
Loss of life will happen either way. Cyber attack, if you took down, where people get their wages, hospitals, I mean, it's still going to lead to a huge number of deaths, just death through other means, I would say.
I think this reminds me of, even though I wasn't alive for it, Y2K, because I remember I hear about it a lot when it switched over to 2000, people thought the computers would be able to handle
It
it.
never actually happened anything bad though. We were waiting for the world to end. I was there having a party, and it was very much that we were just like, oh my god, what's going to happen? But I didn't know there was anything happening.
People thought planes would fall out of the sky and everything. But
What are you doing on a plane on New Year's Eve anyway? Frankly, most people were in their house having a few drinks and didn't notice a single thing.
It's
Nothing
not like
ended.
anything happened anyway.
Yeah. But didn't Russia attack a Ukrainian bank or a few of their banks?
Yeah, they have launched a cyber attack.
Yeah.
They did launch it on a couple of things just before we have kind of bombs going down. I would say the military scale of things is pretty limited at the moment. We've had some bombs dropped, and they've taken out a couple of anti-air missiles, I think. We don't know the scale of it, and what you're hearing from Ukraine, we don't know how much that is true. I was hearing the numbers of many hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers already killed. We don't know about that yet.
Yeah.
Apparently, the Ukrainian border patrol didn't put up a fight against the Russians. They just didn't
Yeah.
resist.
Yeah,
Well,
from
that was
Luhansk.
That was in the
that
Donbass
was the
region.
border where they were already.
Yeah, there are a lot of
separatists,
separatists,
right?
Yeah.
And with that, it's quite interesting to consider the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, because Putin doesn't recognize Ukraine's sovereignty, because something about Gorbachev, his mum was Ukrainian, his dad was Russian. So when the Soviet Union fell and Ukraine got split off and the Soviet Union collapsed, Putin viewed that, I got this quote somewhere, one of the greatest geopolitical catastrophes of the 20th century, the falling of the USSR. And they share so much cultural heritage with each other, and they're so alike, and you kind of have to question how valid are his statements that they are still one country and he doesn't recognize their sovereignty.
Plus, it is Putin, and reportedly quite a bit of his decisions were personal, and they didn't seem to have obvious geopolitical gain.
Not really much strategic gain to take in
Yeah.
Ukraine, apart from having a buffer zone. We're back to Soviet expansionism of the 1940s and 50s.
Well, it is kind of reflective of that.
Yeah, it is, and there's a lot of similarities with this, taking and sort of saying it's about defending Russia, protecting Russia. And I think the idea is they'll just use any excuse in the book. They'll be saying, Ukraine isn't a sovereign country. They've done terrible things to Ukraine through history. When the Ukrainian famine of the early 1930s was man-made by Stalin to murder Ukrainians, to bring them into line. It's something where they don't have a positive history, arguably, unless they accept the Russian Empire. And they have a huge, their own culture. They don't want to be part of the Russian Empire, and they never have done, but they've always been repressed by Russia into joining it.
Yeah. No, if you're Putin, if you put yourself in his shoes, and then you're realizing that Ukraine, then there's this threat of NATO, what else could you do about it? Because you can't really do anything about it, and it's either invade Ukraine, demilitarize, and then take control, or just let this just sit back and watch it happen.
Yeah, but if Ukraine were to join NATO, what would happen? It's not like someone could therefore be aggressive towards you just because Ukraine are part of NATO.
I think Russia would view Ukraine joining NATO as a huge threat to them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I think
that's true.
Putin said that as well, that he'd view that as an aggressive attack not an attack, but an aggressive action by the West.
He's just stating that it's all for Russia's security, and that he's just doing it in Russia's best interests.
I think something that was said at the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union was that NATO would not advance any further east than it already was. So that's kind of passive aggressive in the fact that it's not exactly NATO trying to get Ukraine. Ukraine is trying to get into NATO.
Yeah.
Because they're worried, though.
Yeah.
It is a provocative move against Russia. And I suppose it's the fact with Ukraine joining NATO, it would put a really strong border with Russia, and that would be a threat to them. I mean, it isn't not a threat. That's a double negative. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It is a threat to them, but how much would the West and NATO launch a land invasion? You got to think, we're part of NATO. You are all coming to the age pretty much of conscription. in a couple of years, how many of you would be willing to go and fight Russia in Ukraine?
We were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
I said no.
I said no.
I would.
I would.
Like, yeah, sure. I wouldn't be a so. I want. It's like a conscientious objector. Or whatever. I'd rather help like the medical people, like
That's what
bring
I was-
people
that's what
back.
I'm saying.
Because I'm not for fighting, to be honest.
But I think we underestimate how. If it comes down to a war, I think we underestimate how many people will actually go and fight. Because
A war in Ukraine, though, I could understand if Britain was being invaded, like Ukraine is now. I think if we were in Ukraine and you were Ukrainian young men, you probably would think, well, I need to defend my homeland from the Russian invaders, and that would lead you to join up. But I think if you're going to another country and sort of doing it there, what appetite would there be in Britain, in France? I mean, the major NATO countries, how many of their young men would want to go, or how many of their families would want them to go and fight over there and die? I mean, the bodies would start coming back, and that would change public opinion very quickly. Think of Vietnam, for example. That ended up another Vietnam. I cannot think that democratic opinion would be pro-war in any way, shape, or form for very long.
And this hesitation to like get involved in these affairs that are foreign to us and like not involving our country specifically has been echoed, throughout the whole of history. What sticks out to me was even like, I want to say Marshall Plan. People are even hesitant to like provide financial aid, let alone like send out their own bodies to them. And I mean, it makes sense. If it's not affecting you, you don't want to get involved because it probably like gets into a bigger thing into your personal life. Because as people, not as like a country, we only see like the street life of it. We only see how it affects us personally rather than everyone.
But the thing is, war isn't always fought for lives. It's sometimes fought for economics and stuff. And it's not like this isn't directly affecting us. We have seen obviously oil because Russia is such a major exporter of oil and natural gas, and this can be seen with Germany. We don't really want to cut that linkage off, because even the US, it's relatively afraid to put sanctions on that specific market.
Well, Saudi Arabia get away with a lot of stuff because
Yeah.
of their oil.
Yeah, it's true.
if Russia wanted to, if they felt that,
If they just cut it off, then
yeah, exactly.
kind of done.
Do you know what it also reminds me of? In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and there's a lot of parallels with that. I mean, that was just a kind of straightforward invasion, very similar to what's happened in Ukraine. I mean, that was obviously part of the Cold War, but very interesting parallels with Afghanistan. This is the idea that where would it stop? This isn't just Putin. This is something which maybe we see throughout the kind of modern day Russia. Sense of aggression.
Didn't the USSR lose?
Yeah, they did. But they did invade and do incredible damage.
And there was unrest until 4 years later. I mean, we've just had the Afghanistan crisis half a year ago.
The whole region is really unstable, and it has been for many, many, many decades.
So obviously you're drawing parallels with previous wars. Do you think that would have changed due to the modern era of technology? Do you think it will be a different kind of war?
No, I think it might be slightly different things, but when you look at human nature, people think that, we're beyond war now. We're really not. People are still willing to do terrible things with each other. And I think there's an arrogance in the modern day that these things, won't matter. And they're like, we're never going to go to war. Don't you think that every generation says that? It's like, it will never come to that. And when it does, they are surprised by it. I think it's something where we're not at the end of kind of the evolution of mankind.
Well, it's not like we don't have wars. It's just that we don't have wars that we are exposed to daily.
Yeah.
Like the Middle East, war-ridden.
Yeah.
Like if you think about it, we don't see much of the Middle East, Asia, but it does happen. Isn't it?
I think you said it in History Today that the UK owe it to America that if America were to go to war, then the UK should follow them.
Oh yeah.
I think specifically because of NATO, but yeah,
Yeah.
they're obligated to because of NATO. I think.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily the case with stuff that happens in the Middle East.
That's because the UK and US are one of the strongest allies.
Yeah.
How much does America want a war?
Americans like war, but they don't like fighting in war.
Yeah, they don't like fighting. Maybe like drones. I think technology would be more involved in this. But I think there's a horrible type of war almost when you have technology, pressing a button many, many hundreds of miles away and killing a bunch of people. You don't even see them. I mean, there's something more, I don't know, can I say honest about actual physical fighting?
Yeah.
Less cowardly.
Yeah.
It's way more terrifying to have it
Yeah.
more physical.
Well, then maybe that would stop people actually wanting it a lot more. If they realise what it is to actually go into a battle and physically take someone's life, there's a coldness about pressing a button and killing someone. If you physically have to see the kind of the light disappear from their eyes, I think that changes you as a person. We are relatively kind of kept away from death. I mean, the idea of seeing a dead body, many of us never experience that, or certainly not at a young age. And there's a lot of, oh, you know you're going to hate that, but like video games and TV and movies, you see death and you might think you know what it's like, but if you physically had someone bleeding out in front of you and you witnessed the life disappear from them, that's a different kettle of fish, definitely.
I think like you can not only physically but mentally distance yourself. Like you can turn off the screen, just not look, and just press the button. You wipe out a whole town. I don't know. It's so cold, and in that sense, I think technology has definitely come to help, you know, develop war as a whole. Not only through like developing weaponry and stuff, but even being able to distance yourself and not see the consequences of your direct actions.
Because it allows you to become apathetic to it.
Exactly.
I've got a question. Do you guys think if China chose to invade Taiwan, that the West would be more quick to respond?
No. Less quick, far less quick for that one.
Side by side, yeah.
Because I think the West care a lot more about Russia's expansionary policies than China. Because in a way, China's invading Taiwan doesn't really affect the West as much as Russia invading Ukraine or other Eastern European nations does.
But if they take Taiwan, it'll be all of Taiwan. But when Ukraine took Crimea, they only imposed economic sanctions.
And they were tiny economic sanctions as well.
Do you think there's any financial incentive for like NATO or the Western world to get involved if Taiwan were to get invaded by China? Like, do we rely on them for any major exports?
I'm not sure about Taiwan, I don't know.
In the general
Definitely.
public's eyes, if you're getting involved in a war on the other side of the world, that's not going to be seen well, is it? But because Eastern Europe's a lot more close to us, obviously, and there's a kind of history with it, the public would back that more, I think.
I think it will affect like countries like Australia, South Korea, and their allies.
Japan is what I was thinking of.
And their allies, so we have to help them if they.
I can't see anything in Britain getting involved. I mean, how many people in Britain, if you took a survey, could put Taiwan on a map?
I couldn't.
I know it is from the kind of when you look at revolutionary China, the nationalists all went to Taiwan, which was just called China. They called Red China, the rest of China. So it has a huge history, a hugely controversial history. So I think it's the one where I could put on a map for that, but I don't think many other people would even know what it was. Could people put Ukraine on the map? Yes, it's close. You fly over the Ukraine all the time. It's really, you can get on a plane for a couple of hours and you can be in the Ukraine. It's like a 2-hour flight. That's really short. That's arguably closer than like going to the south of Spain, anywhere like that.
Do you think proximity is
important?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
The whole situation is really scary. Recently, Russian troops have broken through the Kiev region and are launching artillery strikes on the capital. And then Boris Johnson has said that the UK won't look away. And even, was it yesterday, Putin talks about he's prepared to use something never seen before.
That's why
if the West.
I mean, I just thought, what is he going to do with that? Is that just his rhetoric? I mean, a nuclear bomb, I guess, but well, you know, we have been there and we have seen that before. But I mean, I don't think there's an appetite for nuclear war, even with Putin. I think he's going to threaten. He's got a strongman image. That's all part of his rhetoric.
On BBC this morning, someone said that the British Prime Minister was not willing to put British troops on the ground. So I think he just wants to train Ukrainian troops to kind of defend for themselves.
They're giving them a lot of money and weaponry.
And of course, towards the end of the Afghanistan war, that also happened, but that led to extremists in a way, because Osama bin Laden was trained by the CIA. So do you guys think that if they started training Ukrainian people, that they'd kind of turn against them and join the Russian side?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Depends on their nationalist sentiment, doesn't it?
Nationalist sentiment is to defend Ukraine.
Yeah,
So
but
they're never going to go away, let's go
they've
with the
got
Russians.
separatists.
Yeah, I mean,
already.
when the Nazis came in through that region at the beginning of the Second World War with Russia, in the Great Patriotic War, the people of the Ukraine actually thought, shall we join the Nazis? And there's a moment where they actually think, surely they're better than the repression we have under Stalin. The Germans ended up massacring huge numbers of them, so they thought, better the devil we know, and they did support Stalin and Russia and in that. But the Germans made a massive mistake. They could have gained huge amounts of support from that region if they weren't worse than Stalin. There is no real appetite to join Russia apart from maybe a few people near the border who financially benefit from it.
And just on that, I think 58% of the Ukrainians want to join EU, 64% want to join NATO, and it shows that it's so much more. It's not what Putin wants to say, like wants the picture he wants to paint, right? It's not. They're not one nation. They're not, still with the same mindset. They're not still Russians. They want to have their own sovereignty and like have their own autonomy to choose what they want to do. And show like these statistics show that they probably want to flirt more with the West and possibly join NATO. But we'll see.
I mean, if you go to Ukraine, I've never been, but I've seen a lot of pictures. It's it's literally like wandering around London or something like that. I mean, if you look at the pictures, it's such an advanced nation. I think they're having bombs dropped on them in Kiev, and that blows my mind. I mean, we think we're so apart from that, but I'm sure they did as well. It's just ordinary people going around ordinary lives in a major European city, and there are rockets being fired into that city.
We've already had dead people as well.
Yeah.
Like civilians, isn't it?
Yeah, they'll have a lot more before the end of it. So, I mean, we're only starting to see that.
How do you think it's going to end?
What do you think?
I think
Are we going to be there in the end? The ultimate question.
I think I could see there being something similar to Korea, where there's a parallel potentially.
Yeah, I could see them just dividing it and saying you can keep that bit.
Yeah.
You were saying.
I think they'll take more than Donbass because they'll come up from Crimea and down from Belarus, and then they'll split into a parallel.
Yeah.
Belarus kind of.
Kiev is right next to Belarus.
Yeah. Look at the border with Poland though. Ooh.
Large border.
That's scary.
Darren, you were saying technology can be used to advance war. Do you think it can be used to stop war as well?
If it gets there's a certain tipping point, I think, where it's so much where there's a new mutually assured destruction, but not only for nuclear warfare, but it's also for cyber attacks or anything, where it gets so developed and so technologically advanced that everyone knows that if one person does something, everyone's out.
No, but the scary thing is that you can feel protected by being in your own home, not own home, but in your own country. And you're attacking another country which is many, many miles away. But you also know in the back of your mind that they're thinking the same thing. And then, like Ms Macgregor was saying, that without actually seeing or being on the front line, seeing a dead body, you don't actually know how it feels. And then by being behind a computer and just pressing a button, I think that's what makes the threat of war so much more, because people won't be afraid to do anything. And then if we do have a hot war, when people do realise the reality of war, there won't be any time to back down, so no one will be able to stop it. So I think the threat of this cyber war is so much more than we think.
Are we then reaching that point of no return where a war is practically inevitable?
I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're very much developing in that direction.
And I think if we, the chance of getting there, it depends on the leaders that we have essentially and their decisions. Because if it's based on their own gain, maybe they will invade. If it's based off of their respect for their citizens' lives or their army's lives, maybe they won't. Who knows? It depends on their personal motives.
But I think with many countries is don't get involved until there's a certain tipping point. And I think that by just leaving it now, we keep pushing to that tipping point. And then by the time we get to that tipping point, it's made us in a far worse situation than if we'd intervened much quicker.
Yeah. So if Ukraine joined NATO earlier, we'd been able to avoid all of this. I think you said something about the reputation on the leaders that we have. We were talking about it a bit in history today with Boris Johnson. His reputation in the media right now is very much in the mud, to say the least. But a big win for this would be a big win for him.
Well, going to helped Margaret Thatcher with the Falklands.
She
came out a hero with that, heroine from that. Picture of her riding on a tank with the British flag flying, as she completely overturned opinion on her with a win in the Falklands.
Conversely, Tony Blair.
Yeah, destroyed him, that's true, but you wouldn't really say that was a win.
No.
It can go one of two ways.
I think this is the major project.
This has also made Putin a bit more popular. I think his popularity has averaged, it was 61% in August 2021 and is now 69%. So
never trust Russian polls.
That might be because of nationalist sentiment as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Russia
they're
a lot
very
more patriotic.
very patriotic.
And
I love a bit
of
of
course, Putin is like this embodiment of Russia.
Yeah.
You know, he's the strong man.
Yeah, he's
Is
pretty
he
cool.
old though? How old is Putin now?
Older than
He's been powerful for a
He's
long
older
time.
than you think. He never ages
Yeah.
that man. I think he's had a good bit of work done.
Poisoned everyone.
Yeah.
Wasn't he like part of the KGB and?
He was leader of it basically.
You
Yeah.
said hair, you know.
He's the big man.
Yeah, he is.
He has probably done some very terrible things in his life. I feel that he could have listed this and come after me. Tell him that I binned my Putin calendar.
Oh,
Yeah.
Putin.
Yeah, he's gone. He's in the bin.
No longer Stalin Russian.
Do you think like events in Russia, like the Champions League final, or
No,
F1
that
race,
should get
That's
moved.
gone.
think that should
When
get
is the
moved?
Champions League
Oh, it
final?
depends though.
In May?
Wait, when's the Grand Prix?
I think it'll be mid next year. Oh, this year.
But if you think about it, they haven't moved the World Cup, have they? From Qatar, even though.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
I'm not at war with Qatar.
I mean, it's
though.
not
very
Yeah,
different.
but
Like,
Qatar's
it's-
not a
it's
very
a
nice
big-
place.
Would you travel to Russia at the moment?
I don't think.
Would we
That's
take a
strong though.
Would we take a school trip there?
Yeah, shall I do my school trip? People keep asking me, when are you planning the next school trip to Russia? I'm like, not in the foreseeable future.
So for us,
There's quite often when you plan the trip, they often give you a cheaper price where you can change at Kiev planes.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, that's really going to happen.
I mean, looking towards the future. Thank you very much for coming to join us today. It's been very interesting to talk about this.
Yeah.
Obviously, maybe a big turning point. We're living in history right now. But see you next week, I guess.
Yeah, see you
All right.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.